Good morning, class. Today we're in social studies. Of course, you do not have the social studies book at home. If you would like to read it with me, you can just look at it on the video. Otherwise, you can open up this book on your Clever website, look under TCI, and then you can find the page there. Continue to go there to play review games or to do the flashcards. Our test is going to be on Thursday this week. We'll spend a little time reviewing tomorrow together. But today we got a little reading further section. It's on page 34, 35, 36, and 37. It's about the mighty Mississippi. Of course, this is the river that runs right through the middle of our country. It starts all the way up in Minnesota and ends up all the way down in the Gulf of Mexico. And there's great history with the mighty Mississippi. Today we're going to read 4 pages about it. Now, you can do this assignment while we're reading it or at the end. And I'll model how to do it while we're reading it, or you can do it at the end. Now, our assignment needs to be adjusted a little bit. For example, it says, use the map below to help you and your partner ask and answer questions. Well, obviously we're at home, so we don't have partners, so you're on your own. And it says, write 3 questions to ask another pair. So what you were supposed to do is write 3 questions, and then you were going to trade your assignment with somebody else, and they were going to answer them. Well, we'll just modify that. Today you do the top part on your own sheet and the bottom on your own sheet, instead of doing the top on yours and the bottom on somebody else's. So go ahead and start with your name at the top. As we read through this section, think of 3 questions that you might ask about the Mississippi. Of course, they should probably be questions that you could answer. Okay? So here's their example. How many states does the Mississippi River run through? So you write that here for number 1, and then you go ahead and count how many states the Mississippi touches through or runs through. Okay? I'll give you a couple other ideas as we go. 3 at the top, and then answer those same exact 3 questions at the bottom. All right, book page 34. The Mississippi River is one of the largest rivers in the United States, and it runs down the middle of our country. The famous author Mark Twain often wrote about the Mississippi and how it influenced the states and their people. Why do geographers consider it one of the most important rivers of our nation? And now here's a little snippet of what Mark Twain wrote. It was dark. Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn could hear the great river in front of them. Now, those are characters in his book that he wrote, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. They found their raft, untied it, and climbed on. In this book, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain tells what happens next. The raft drew beyond the middle of the river. The boys pointed her head right. When she's saying her there, they're calling their boat a her, which is kind of funny. And they lay on their oars, which means that they were rowing the boat. They came near, letting the current drift them out of the range of the island. The boys were off on an adventure down the great Mississippi. Although Tom and Huck are made-up characters, the Mississippi is a real river. It is just as remarkable as the 2 friends in the story discover. Many readers enjoy Twain's story. He followed it with the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. This book, too, featured the Mississippi River. Twain's writings brought the river into the minds of America. So Mark Twain's Adventure of Huckleberry Finn was published in 1884. That's over 100 years ago. Ever since, Americans have enjoyed reading about Huck's adventure. So this is a picture of Mark Twain, and this is a picture of what the cover of his book would look like. I haven't come up with any questions about Mississippi River yet, besides that Mark Twain wrote about it. As a boy, Mark Twain loved to watch steamboats like this travel down the Mississippi River. The map in this image shows how far people could travel along the Mississippi. So here's the picture, but embedded in the picture is this little map up here, and then you could see everywhere where these people could travel along that Mississippi River. Life on the Mississippi long ago. Mark Twain's real name was Samuel Clemens. And that was going to be my first question. What is Mark Twain's, apostrophe S because he owns it, Mark Twain's real name? Okay, I'm going to answer my own question right away. Right now you'd be trading it with your partner, but we don't have partners at home. So what was his real name? His real name was Samuel Clemens. I'm going to turn my book so I can spell it correctly. So I got my first question. And I answered it, Samuel Clemens. He based Tom and Huck's adventure on his own life growing up in the small town of the Mississippi. To the young boy, one of the most exciting sounds in the world was the cry, "Steamboat a-comin'!" The steamboat brought interesting people and new things like goods for the store or letters from faraway places. Now, a lot of our stores get their stuff brought to them by trucks. But back in this time, a lot of people got stuff across our country by boat. And so if a boat pulls up, you would know there'd be some new products that you could buy at the local stores. In 1859, Twain became a steamboat pilot. Standing behind the wheel of his boat, he learned to avoid dangers in the muddy waters. He took his name as a writer from the calls the boatmen made to tell the pilot how deep and safe the water was. Mark 3! So mark means that there's something in the water, and 3 means where. Half Twain! Mark Twain! It's in Twain's time, the Mississippi was like a great highway. People could travel down smaller rivers and then into Mississippi all the way from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. And that gave me a great idea for my second question. Where does the Mississippi, M-I-S-S-I-S-S-I-P-P-I, where does the Mississippi start and end? Question mark. And I think we just read that. I'm not going to write it on mine just in case you want to come up with a different question. But if you pick my question, then you should answer that. It starts in Minnesota, right here, and it goes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. People used rafts and boats to carry goods down the Mississippi to the busy port of New Orleans. After the invention of the steamboat, people could send goods up the river too. It was kind of crazy because the river flows south that you could only send river goods down the river. But then we got the steamboat that could go against the current, and the steamboat would push its way back up the river. So now we can get goods down and back up. Now, why do we want to get into New Orleans? Well, New Orleans dumps in the Gulf of Mexico, and now we can go out to other countries. So people in Minnesota, even though we're an inland state, could get our goods to faraway countries. All right, I've got 2 questions, and I got, 2 answers, but I didn't write the second one. I'm not going to write any more because I'd like you to do your own on that one. So sometime in the next 2 pages, see if you can't come up with another question. Changing the river. People depend on the Mississippi River, but they could never quite rely on it to be safe for traveling or even living nearby. Travel was dangerous for boats in low water. So if we got a lot of rain, we'd have high water, but if we didn't get a lot of rain, it'd be low water. And if there was low water, your boat could crash. And they could even crash into tiny islands in the river. During very rainy times, the river sometimes overflowed and flooded the surrounding settlements and farmlands. In his writing, Mark Twain recalled that during one flood, the river became 70 miles wide. Now, 70 miles wide is as wide as it would be from Milwaukee almost to Madison. Could you imagine a river that wide? The highway that runs from Milwaukee to Madison, completely flooded by water. That would be amazing. With so many dangers, people began to change the river. They built levees to stop the river from flooding farms and towns, which worked well most of the time. Your definition for levees on the side: a wall typically made of dirt built along the river to keep it from flooding. And you can see a picture of it here. Okay? This one was made out of wood. Sometimes you can find them made out of stone or big, huge metal sheets. People also changed the river to improve travel. They built bridges across the river. They also dug mud out of the river bottom to make it deeper so that large boats could travel more easily. Even with these changes, the river was not always predictable. As Mark Twain once wrote, "The Mississippi River will always have its own way. No engineering skill can persuade it to do otherwise." In other words, because it's flowing water, sometimes it will move rocks or sediments. This proved true when the river still flooded in 1898 despite levees. So in other words, the water came up over these levees. People had to fix the levees and build more of them. They hoped that new ones would hold better. Maybe you came up with a question about levees in there. Maybe you came up with a question about flooding in there. Maybe you came up with a question about the rivers always changing. The river today, our last page. The changes people made to the river have made it easier to use. If Mark Twain visited the river today, he would see huge barges. That's what we have a picture of down here. This little boat can push all of these barges because the water makes the weight of those barges float. So it's actually light to push those because the river is doing a lot of the work. That carries millions of tons of goods up and down the river each year. But changing the river does not mean people control it. In 2005, a hurricane called Katrina hit the city of New Orleans. Huge winds and waves, heavy rains from the storm made the Mississippi overflow. One by one, the levees failed. Most of the city was underwater. Lots of people climbed onto the roofs to get away from the water, but many did not get away and died. Hurricane Katrina was one of the most powerful hurricanes that's ever hit the New Orleans area. And besides the heavy rain that fell, we also had what's called storm surge. Water from the sea, from the Gulf of Mexico, came up and helped break these levees. And with the broken levees, then the water rushed into New Orleans. It was a very, very terrible time for the people of New Orleans. Thousands of people lost their homes and their businesses. The storm and the flood cost billions of dollars. It was one of the greatest disasters of our nation's history. Since that time, people have worked hard to rebuild New Orleans. They have looked to geographers for help. Geographers study the Mississippi River and the ways human change influence it. And though the river might never be completely controlled, geographers' knowledge helps people who live near the Mississippi plan well for the future. All right, guys, that was the last page in this chapter before we start our next chapter. Your assignment today is to have come up with 3 questions. Notice mine ended with question marks, so you should have questions there. And then the 3 answers to your questions. So question number 1, answer that goes with number 1. Question number 2, answer 2, and 3, and 3. Tomorrow we'll spend some time reviewing, and then Thursday we'll have our test. God bless your day.